Hey, it's You're All Doomed, the podcast where we slash Friday the 13th Part 2 into 13-minute chunks. I'm barstool psychologist Greg.
And I'm just Brian.
And this chunk begins with a bunch of people hanging around in a bar and ends with the first full-on, straight-to-camera reveal of the man, the myth, the legend, Jason Voorhees.
Pillowcase head.
Pillowcase version. So, the gang is still hanging out in the bar. And I noticed in the background is an arcade cabinet of Galaxian, which is a fun game, but not quite as good as Galaga. And a pretty bitchin'-looking Kiss pinball machine.
Yeah, I noticed that too. I like that.
Yeah, I would totally love that in the basement.
Sucks.
That'd be sweet. Well, I mean, okay.
I just wanted to get that on the record.
In case Gene Simmons is listening and you want to put him in his place. So Ginny and Paul and Ted are kind of off on their own, sitting at the bar. Ted has had what appear to be like 11 beers or so. I mean, he's well into the evening. But they kind of start chatting about what Paul had told the group on a previous evening around the campfire.
Yeah, it kind of gets started off when Ted said he thinks it's kind of ridiculous how, Jeff and Sandra got hauled in by the cops because, 5 years ago, some girl panicked and fell out of a canoe, his words.
Yeah, I thought that was an interesting take on what the general consensus is about what happened to Alice, that she panicked and fell out of a canoe.
But I also thought it was odd because earlier in the movie, Ted was the one that seemed particularly shaken by the Camp Crystal Lake sign and was like, no, guys, you don't want to know anything about this. And now here, granted, he's, 11 or 12 beers into the night, but he's very kind of dismissive of the whole thing, like, whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's an interesting point, that he was fully on board with the legend earlier, but now he's kind of dismissive. And
so Ginny starts to wonder if there really is a Jason, or as she says, a boy beast running around Camp Crystal Lake. And Paul's just like, oh, come on, guys.
Come on, Ginny. Yeah.
And I don't know. She seems to think that, what would Jason be like today? And
she obviously starts to kind of put her child psychology background to use here and think about the legend of boy Jason growing into, wilderness man Jason through a more of a scientific lens, perhaps.
Yeah, like she wonders if he would be an out-of-control psychopath or a child trapped in a man's body or a quote-unquote frightened retard.
Yeah, which was just, in this day and age, that's a record scratch. It was such a jolt to hear that term. It was almost as shocking as an out-of-nowhere N-word in a movie. I mean, it's just like, and especially from a character like that who, as a child psychologist, probably deals with children that have developmental issues and stuff, and it's just, that's how casual we were about Down syndrome and mental difficulties back in those days, and even perhaps autism, and just like, wow, even the beloved sympathetic character here is just casually throwing that word around. It took me right out of the movie.
Yeah, me too. She starts to kind of go down a checklist. She mentions things like the only person that he knew was his mother. Which, okay, that could be true. It sounds like Jason was an outcast as a child. And, I think Mrs. Voorhees had said something along the lines of, he didn't have any friends. And
yeah, Ginny says he never went to school, so he never had any friends.
Yeah. And so, she kind of points out that Jason's mother was everything to him. So it would make sense that if he were to witness this, this murder of his mother, however unlikely it was because he drowned in the lake, but if he were to witness that, then of course it's going to affect him and he's going to react negatively.
But what my question here to that point is, why does Ginny assume Jason must have seen that happen? There's no indication even in Alice's recounting of what happened at Crystal Lake that Jason saw what happened. I mean, first of all, no one's even 100% sure that Jason is actually running around. Most people disbelieve that. But for all Ginny knows, if he did if he was real, he could have been on the other side of the lake when that whole happened. There's no reason for her to think that. that he saw it happen. Obviously, if you believe that what happened to Alice was an act of revenge, then Jason knew that his mother had died. But there's nothing to lead anyone to believe, except the screenwriter, that Jason saw it happen.
Yeah, I think she's just acting purely off the legend itself.
Yeah,
like, Jason's a vengeful killer. And why? Because his mother died and he saw it. And there's no real evidence to point to that, but she's just piling onto it and saying, well, that's what I heard, and so that's what must have happened. And she also, in a backwards way, she kind of defends Mrs. Voorhees' actions years ago by, saying that, her revenge was over a sense of loss, and that her rage was over what, she think happened, which was that someone wasn't paying attention to her son, and because of that, he died. And so she went on this killing spree, and now Jason is kind of, paying it forward by something happened to his mother, and he's like, well, she did this for me, and now it's
that's
my
all
turn.
he knows. That's the only reaction he can comprehend, so that's what he does. I thought she took it into a weird kind of metaphysical direction, but I did think it was kind of creepy how she says that he wouldn't know the meaning of death. He wouldn't understand what that meant, even though he saw his mother beheaded, and he's crying for her resurrection. Kind of a weird, kind of dorm room trippy place to take it.
Yeah, it's a bit much.
But I found it a little bit creepy. It's all just flavor for the legend. But I'm not sure what set Ginny off here. Why she seems so weirded out by this whole thing. But maybe it's a little bit of the beer talking.
Yeah, and Paul alludes to that as well. Suggesting that she might be drunk, but. I don't know. There's something kind of sweet about it. Like maybe Ginny is obsessing over it just a little bit too much, but there's also like a very sweet, nurturing side that's coming out where she's almost trying to empathize with what Jason is doing. And, I don't know. It's like she's starting to feel bad for him almost and trying to defend his actions. And
or at least understand it in a sympathetic way, putting more stock in it than just scary stories around the campfire. I'm thinking maybe it's because you have a little bit of a crush on Ginny. I think you might be in love.
Might be. We're going to spend probably the next 3 or 4 hours talking about Ginny, if you don't mind.
Yeah, that's fine.
I've got some notes here that I'd like to discuss. So,
like love notes, or
they're notes. Let's just say that.
Okay. If you wrote poems, then I'll just be in the other room. But go ahead.
Oh well. In that case, maybe we should just move on.
No, I'm with you. I mean, we may as well just go ahead and get it out on the table here. I mean, Ginny is my favorite of the surviving characters in the whole series. She's
adorable,
but she's tough. We'll see later on. She's pretty tough. She's maybe not as resourceful as Alice was in the previous movie, but she holds her own well enough. She puts the beat down on Jason, as we'll see coming up. And yeah, she's got a good sense of humor. She's obviously got a sensitive side, but yeah, she's just a little ray of sunshine.
And she's putting some thought into what's going on too. It's not just reacting in self-defense. She's trying to rationalize what's going on and trying to understand it because, maybe if you understand why someone is acting some way, that you might be able to remedy the situation.
Yeah, or find a clever way to deal with it, perhaps.
Yeah, and whether she has that opportunity, I don't know. But she's putting some thought to it, and she's not just so dismissive as everyone else is, where it's like, oh, it's just some crazy legend, I don't believe it. And she's like, no, but what if it was true? Why would someone act this way? And yeah, she's adorable.
Yeah, I mean, I think that she's probably the most intelligent of the final girls, let's call them. And yeah, I mean, she's great. We've always kind of leaned in the direction of Ginny.
Yeah, take that, Jamie Lee Curtis.
Wow, throwing some shade at JLC. All right. We go back to the lodge. Where Mark and Vicky are, kind of talking things over while playing their video games. And we learn that Mark is in a wheelchair because of a motorcycle accident. Well, that sounds pretty tragic. He mistakenly thinks that he won't be in that thing for the rest of his life, but we'll shortly find out that he's wrong. Vicky offers him a hit from her lit joint, which he declines because he says he's in training. So I like to picture him as like a champion murder ball athlete or something. But yeah, he's obviously.
I think he's referring to the counselor training.
Oh, you're probably right. But
sure.
So is she.
Yeah, but maybe he's more by the book than she is.
Well, okay, but I like my murder ball answer better.
So upstairs in the lodge, Jeff is playing a pre-scromp harmonica, as guys do, apparently.
Yeah, I don't really get what he's going for there. That's an odd mood setter. I also noticed that for the second time, wherever Jeff and Sandra are, if they're cuddling or about to get busy, there's always a half-read paperback book laying on the table. It's laying open on its pages with its spine cracked. So I don't know if Sandra's a big reader until Jeff gets in the room or what's going on. But it's twice now that I've noticed that.
We also see that Mark and Vicky have decided to finally cut the tension, and they're going to spend the night together. And in preparation for this, Vicky runs to her cabin, which also happens to be Terry's cabin, to get a few things. Another thing worth noting is that a storm is approaching. And, what we learned from Kevin Bacon is it's got to tear down the valley like a son of a gun. So we got to keep an eye out on that storm.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to jump too far ahead or reveal anything that happens to these characters, but in the grand scheme of things, I feel like Mark may have dodged a bullet. If he and Vicky had truly hooked up, I feel like she would have taken it too far too quickly with him. She just seems a little bit too into him right off the bat. Now, I'm all for a woman taking charge if she's attracted to someone. No problem there. But she's just not playing it cool at all. And I feel like maybe she's almost a girl who only dates people in wheelchairs or something.
Or has some sort of, ailment that, comes off as like she comes off as like the motherly, supportive, I can help you get through this. And
I feel like he would have found himself in over his head with her. But
no, I can see that. Yeah, she's hard to get. She is not playing. And her approach is a little bit too forward.
She comes on pretty strong.
Yeah, there's nothing playful about it.
Mm-hmm.
Like she's, direct from the word go. And it's like, she just had her sights on Mark, like you said, because, oh, look, he's in a wheelchair. I can take advantage of this.
Yeah, that was the vibe I was getting, and it made me a little skeeved. Vicky is back in her cabin, putting on her third date outfit, which is a thick sweater, although it's oddly cropped, so it doesn't cover her midriff, but, I mean, it looks like a shag rug. I mean, the thing is like 3 inches thick. And then she also curiously changes from, perfectly attractive black underwear to these kind of weirdly loose brown satin panties that are not flattering.
No, they're basically granny panties.
They're basically granny panties and moccasins.
Yep.
So not the most alluring of wardrobe choices for a seduction session. She then runs outside to rummage around in the car, and for a second, I swear to God, I thought she was looking for a condom.
Yeah, I wasn't sure what she was looking for.
It turned out to be her hairbrush.
Yeah.
But, I started cracking up because I figured that she was hoping someone had brought a rubber along.
Like, oh, there's got to be one in here somewhere. Meanwhile, Mark thinks he hears Vicky outside the lodge, so he decides to go out on the porch to investigate. And at this point, it's pouring. So it's really kind of it's hard to see, and it's really dark. But he's not out there very long before getting hacked in the face with a machete.
Yeah.
Just brutally hacked in the face. Arguably the most violent death we've seen in the series so far.
Cleaved in the face.
Just makes you like clench every muscle in your body when you see it happening.
There's a little bit of another camera cheat here, though, because we're seeing a shot of Mark from the back as the camera approaches him. Naturally, you're supposed to assume that Jason is approaching Mark from behind, but then it cuts to a shot of Mark's face, and we clearly see that no one is behind him, so it's not someone approaching. But then it cuts again to someone approaching him from behind, but the machete comes from the front. So again, they're messing with the point of view of the audience, making us think we're seeing through the killer's eyes, which we're not. And then again, it's another instance of there's no way Mark wouldn't have seen Jason standing there to cleave him in the face with a machete. It hits him square between the eyes, and there's nowhere Jason could have been standing that Mark wouldn't have seen him there.
Yeah, and is the handle of the machete pointing down to imply that he was hit in the front, or was it pointing up? Because if it was pointing up, then someone could have reached over from behind and, chopped him in the face with the machete.
Yeah, he definitely gets hit from the front. You see the arm, clearly in front of Mark's head. So, Jason is standing within 2 feet of Mark's face. And so, boom.
Well, it's not the only misstep in this scene, because the force of the impact sends him and his wheelchair rolling backwards down dozens of steps that I don't remember being anywhere near the lodge.
No, it's like the staircase from The Exorcist, for God's sake.
Yeah, it's suggesting that this lodge is on the top of a mountain and the lake is at the base of the staircase. He goes down so many stairs.
Yeah, but it's just that's the final indignity, because it is brutal.
And he goes bouncing and bouncing down all these stairs, and then all of a sudden we get this very random freeze frame, once again dissolved to a white screen.
Yeah,
similar to what we saw after Annie was killed in part 1, and I think after Claudette was killed, and it's really just a weird stylistic choice, and I just wonder if it has something to do with hiding an edit of some sort, or just not knowing where else to cut it. And so you just kind of fade it out and go to white, and then
it's this blast flare that in this case was hilariously edited to coincide with Jeff and Sandra's orgasm upstairs. But you're right. It's a strange transition. So we say goodbye to Mark.
Mark Jarvis is his name, and a name that might pop up later in the series. We'll just have to see. He was played by Tom McBride. I thought it was interesting that he appeared on billboards in New York City as the Marlboro Man.
Yeah. And an episode of Gimme a Break.
Yep. Sadly, he died of complications from AIDS in September of 1995.
Yeah, he was only 42 years old. That's pretty sad. Apparently, his last days are featured in a documentary called Life and Death on the A-List. So if you're interested in his tragic story, there's probably a lot more to learn there. And that's a shame. He seemed like a good guy.
A little piece of movie trivia. It's sad, but true. He was the first cast member who played one of the teenage camp counselors to actually die in real life.
Oh, wow. So clearly at this point, Jason is on a full-fledged rampage. And after the horribly cruel murder of Mark Jarvis, Jason makes his way into the main lodge. And again, we see a glimpse of his shadow on the wall, and it's curiously misshapen and kind of, just unsettling. He grabs the surprisingly sturdy toy spear that Ted had earlier at the campfire prank and heads upstairs.
What makes you think it was a toy?
Well, where would you get a spear in this day and age? The spear store? You go to Pier 1 and get a spear? I don't know.
The same place you'd buy a machete, I suppose.
Well, but you get a machete at the hardware store because it's an actual tool. But
that's true.
Spear, it's a strange costume implement.
No, fair enough.
Meanwhile, upstairs, Sandra is underneath Jeff as they've finished their little lovemaking session, and she unfortunately sees Jason come into the room and raise the spear, and you can see the look of horror on her face as Jason impales them both at the same time.
Yeah, I don't know who got it worse there. Obviously they both end up on the, wrong end of the spear, I guess you could say. But Sandra sees it coming. And so there's a brief, second or two where she has a moment of panic before she gets killed. But Jeff only maybe sees Sandra's reaction and has a moment to think, what's wrong? But has no idea what's going on behind him. And then, gets a spear in the back. I mean, it sucks for both of them, don't get me wrong, but...
Yeah, I mean, I guess it boils down for me to two questions. One is, how instantaneous is your death when you're impaled like that? If there's any time to linger before you bleed out, then poor Jeff is left wondering, what's happened to me? What? And the confusion and bewilderment would be terrible. But if death is instantaneous... The second question is, do you want to know that your end is coming, or would you rather just it happen and you never know?
And even if you did have a chance to survive a wound like that, you're still kind of screwed because you're shish kebab together. You can't just like roll over and be like, oh my God, I got this bad wound. I'm going to, wrap a shirt around it and stop the bleeding. Like, no, you're stuck. You're stuck together, and there's nowhere you can go, and you're probably just going to lay there until you bleed out, and it's going to suck.
Yeah. All around, just not a pleasant way to go. I guess we'll cover Jeff first, because presumably he died first since he was on top. He was played by Bill Randolph, who later appeared in the movie Penn and Teller Get Killed. I didn't see any recent credits for him, but it seems like he's a good sport and does the convention circuit from time to time, and has fun with the fact that he was in this movie. He mentioned in the book of Crystal Lake Memories that he knew Kevin Bacon, and even at the time thought, well, they're casting me because they already used Kevin Bacon and we're pretty much the same guy. So he even kind of got a kick out of that fact. Sandra was played by Marta Kober, who made an appearance in a little movie called Rad that we enjoyed as a How Did This Get Made live episode in Chicago. She did some small parts here and there, and was also active on the convention circuit. But it looks like her days lately have been kind of rough. She's had some run-ins with the law. There's pretty hard evidence that she's been involved in some substance abuse difficulties and stuff, so hopefully things have turned around for her and she's doing well, but we'll just have to wish her well.
One little piece of trivia from the making of this movie was that there was a more graphic sex scene that was filmed between Sandra and Jeff that involved full frontal nudity with Marta until the directors realized that she was underage.
Yikes!
And had to destroy all the footage to, just pretend that never happened.
Yikes. Yeah, hopefully that was truly destroyed. And
yeah, something that would not happen these days, I would imagine. And then one interesting tidbit about Sandra, the character, we might be hearing from her brother down the road a little bit. So stay tuned for that.
Which introduces an entire can of worms of timeline and continuity, and we'll get there.
After a pretty grim series of events at Packanack Lodge, we head back to the bar/casino where Paul and Ginny are heading back to camp while Ted decides to stay back. He's had a few beers. He's probably looking to have a few more. And
Paul tells Ted to let Maggie drive the pickup truck. So I'm guessing that Maggie is one of the nerds who was playing Galaxian in the background instead of pounding back 11 beers.
Right. And after Paul and Ginny walk away, Ted asks this random old man at the bar if there are any after-hours places around here. And the old guy is just like, there sure are. And Ted just turns around and walks away. So we don't know where Ted ends up. But
I kind of picture Ted like going back home with that old couple, sort of like Gareth on The Office when he rides away in the little sidecar. That might be Ted's fate, which, I don't know, that might be worse than being impaled by a toy spear.
And then once again, we go back to Packanack Lodge, where Vicky is wondering where Mark is. She heads upstairs, because where else would the guy in the wheelchair be?
Boy, that's an excellent point. Yeah, where would he be sleeping? There must be first floor bedrooms, but why would she go upstairs?
I don't know. That's the first place she goes.
And I don't see that they have a lift or anything like that, so...
Yeah, but while she's up there, she goes into Sandra and Jeff's room, and she walks in. The lights are off, but she walks closer to the bed. There's someone under the sheets. Greg, who is it?
I was counting down, hoping that this chunk would end with this screenshot. I was counting down like it was New Year's fucking Eve. And the payoff was magnificent. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 1, and boom, Jason sits up in the bed. We get our first full look at him. He's got the potato sack on or pillowcase on his head with one eye hole cut out. And I mean, it's glorious. It's almost perfect.
It's so far it is my favorite minute marker.
Oh, absolutely.
Of the podcast. It's just perfect. He's sitting up. He almost has this like startled look on his face, like boo. But it's if I was on the receiving end of that person popping up out of the sheets, I would what would happen.
Yeah, right. We've pretty much covered what would happen. There'd be quite a mess to clean up. Yeah, I mean, I was cheering with the freeze frame on that moment.
It's a great cliffhanger too.
It really is. It was top notch.
So I bet you can't wait to find out what happens next week.
Come back and join us. But let's take a moment to pause and talk about the bag. No one has said this on record that I was able to find, but I mean, I would be shocked if it wasn't at least somewhat inspired by The Town That Dreaded Sundown.
It's a blatant ripoff.
Yeah, I mean, that was a very popular video cassette cover with the Texarkana Killer wearing the very similar looking bag on his head on the poster and the cover of the videotape. But people who worked on part 2, at least in the book Crystal Lake Memories, are pretty dismissive of the bag. None of them really seem happy with that look. It seemed like it was almost an afterthought out of desperation or something. And I wondered if the reason to have him wearing a mask at all was less a creative choice and more of a money-saving ploy, so that they didn't have to put makeup on the actor every time, or what. It's just like if he's scary looking, make him scary looking. But to cover his face all the time was just a strange decision, especially since no one seems super enthused by it after the fact. I think it's pretty great.
I like it. Yeah, I mean, if Jason were to don something like, I don't know, like a hockey mask, like that might be cooler. But as of right now, I think the pillowcase look is fantastic. And it is creepy, however derivative it is. It's really creepy. And I've also wondered, less from a practical standpoint of, why the filmmakers, chose to have Jason hide his face. And I've wondered why Jason would choose to hide his face.
Good question.
Is it something he's ashamed of? I mean, it's not like he's someone that's out in public frequently. He's not going to that casino to listen to the Smokey Boys band or whatever. He hides
he runs across roads, and that's pretty much his only interaction with the world.
Yeah, and so he really shouldn't have any concerns about how he looks or what other people think of him, because if he comes across people, he kills them. So it makes me wonder if maybe he is self-conscious about it, in some level, where he just doesn't like the way he looks and doesn't want to see himself. Not that he comes across mirrors very often, but there's got to be some, we could ask Ginny this question, why would someone choose to hide their face?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, while we know that he never went to school and had any friends, it's conceivable that he was made fun of by other children, that weren't his friends. So perhaps he grew up with the traumatic experience of being mocked for his unusual appearance. That could be some reason that he's, ashamed of his looks. I mean, I also wouldn't entirely put it past him that he just knows it's fucking scary to have this faceless creature killing you, and he just it ramps up his revenge by terrifying the shit out of whoever he's about to kill.
And the cute denim overalls are just for practical purposes.
Well, yeah, he's got to take what he can get. I mean, he's a thrifty guy. So
no, but you're right. Like, yeah, it probably does act as just like an extra layer of menace. If you just saw a guy in overalls coming at you, yeah, that in itself is pretty terrifying. But if it was a guy in overalls and a sack on his head, okay, you've just elevated the game a little bit. So maybe it's part of his strategy. But again, he doesn't play with his victims. He doesn't really give them a chance to be scared. He surprises them, and so it is probably more likely that he has a sack on his head, just so you don't have to have someone in makeup every single time.
Maybe he knows it's going to rain, and he just wants to he doesn't have a raincoat with a hood, so he's like, well, I'll just put on this pillowcase. And,
that could be.
Maybe he's chilly. A couple more questions about the bag, though. Earlier when we heard Jason breathing heavily, I'm guessing that's because he had it on. So he's been wearing it, at least since the camp reopened here. But I wonder, 5 years ago when he killed Alice, was he wearing the bag on his head when he was standing right next to Jesse in the rain while he was singing Itsy Bitsy Spider? Has he just been wearing this thing around no matter where he goes? And again, if he was the one who made the phone call to Alice before she got killed, was he standing in the phone booth with a bag on his head? It's just like, I don't know. I have some trouble with the logistics of how long he's had this bag, and does it stink? Does he wash it? Is it a different one each time?
Yeah, it's not that dirty.
Right. So, I almost wondered if he'd stolen it from the bed that he just killed Jeff and Sandra in, but it's got a cord tied around its neck. So, I think he's had this thing on. We've seen his shadow.
We saw him run across the street with it on.
Yeah, right. So, it's just, it is tidy.
So as Jason jumps out of bed, I think it's time to put this episode to bed.
All right, I agree. Our death recap is 3. We've said farewell to Mark and Jeff and Sandra.
You shall be missed.
Indeed.
Thanks again for joining us. I've been Brian.
I'm Greg.
And you're all doomed.